Hey partners, family, friends, supporters of, welcome back to the Partners of Commercial Fishermen podcast. I'm stoked that you chose to take time out of your day to plug us in and connect with our community because we are worldwide. We're in the US, we're Canada, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, places I don't even know, Indonesia. I know that we're also in Indonesia, and we're just so happy that we are able to connect on this platform, this little corner of the interweb just for us. And if you're new here, welcome. Welcome to the crew. I'm your host, Megan Waldrop, and we are thrilled to have you. Every week we talk about the nuances of commercial fishing lifestyle and what it's like to be a partner and all that goes with it. And number one on the list is safety. That is the number one thing that partners all over the world think about. They always think about their partner's safety. I mean, commercial fishing is rated one of the top most dangerous jobs in the world. I know I don't need to remind you all of that. We already know that. But man, safety, how do we keep our fishermen safe? And how do we keep them safe in a way that's going to bring peace to our hearts? Can you imagine not having to worry so much when they go out? I mean, that would be a gift, right? And guess what? It can be, and it's a gift that we can give ourselves because here's a fact. It's a fun fact too. The number one reason that fishermen wear PFDs or personal flotation devices is because their partners tell them to. And the number two reason is because their kids want them to. So we have more influence than we think. And sometimes it just takes these gentle, encouraging conversations to remind them how much we love them, how much they are worthy and worth to us. They're invaluable. They're priceless. They're the loves of our lives, right? And so we want them to come home safely. Regardless of the ego, we can bring them home safe. They're like, I don't need a PFD. I got conversation prompts in the Instagram posts this week. All week I'm posting so much great information. And after you listen to this episode, you're going to be fully armored with so much great content and also more confidence to know that you can find PFDs that are going to make fishermen feel not only that they're protected, but are going to move with them. They're going to work with their body type so they'll actually wear them and not just buy them to appease us, but actually put them on their bodies, which is why I'm so stoked about this episode. We are diving into the world of commercial fishing safety gear with Len Nelson of Kent Safety Products. They are a trusted name in personal flotation devices, safety gear. They also have the most Coast Guard approved gear on the market in the entire world. Mic drop. From engineering PFDs that balance comfort and protection to collaborating with fishermen and safety organizations, Len offers a behind-the-scenes look at how innovation shapes the future of fishing safety. We also discuss common misconceptions around PFDs, advancements in technology, and how wearing one can save lives, not just physically, but emotionally for the families back home. I know y'all hear me. I hope you enjoy this episode, and I'd love to answer any questions that you have. If you have any questions, you can reach out to support@POCF Pride. If you're like, I just don't know which one to choose, I can help guide you there. If you want to shop right now and see what's on the market, go to kentsafetyproducts.com. They have so many freaking amazing varieties out there. Also, a special mention that Kent Safety Products is now a sponsor of the Partners of Commercial Fishermen community. And I am so thrilled to have them on because of their commitment to keeping fishermen safe through their high quality gear. And that's why we proudly partner with them. And I only partner with companies that truly care about our fishing communities because I'm not going to BS y'all. We ain't got time for that, right? But Kent Safety is one of these allies. And I'm so happy to have them aboard. And you're really going to love this interview with Len. He's just such a gentle, kind man, and he is very knowledgeable and very passionate. And that's what we want. We want people that have that passion to make sure that they are creating the highest quality products to keep our fishermen safe. Happy Boat Safety Week to everyone. Happy, safe, and bountiful fishing. Here's to our fishermen coming home trip after trip and us celebrating for many, many generations to come. Let's dive in.
I'm Megan Waldrop, host of the Partners of Commercial Fishermen podcast, an extension of an online community for partners to connect and feel less alone. Our podcast invites fishermen, family, friends, and supporters of the industry to learn, laugh, vent, and hear stories about this incredibly unique way of life. What do you say? Let's dive in. Len Nelson, I'm so thrilled to have you on today because I feel like we've had so many great conversations about the safety gear of Kent Safety Products. And I'm so thrilled for you to break down everything that goes on within your company and ways that we can get our fishermen protected out there. Because, I mean, if anything, the one major concern of all partners commercial fishermen is making sure our fishermen get home safe. So thank you so much again for your time today. We really appreciate having you.
Well, thank you for having me, Megan. I'm really happy to be here.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I'm going to start from the beginning. We'd love to get to know you and tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the world of safety gear.
It was a little bit by accident, like so many of us. And I've always been in and around the outdoor industry, being based in Minnesota. Obviously, we have a lot of water, not any salty water, but I've been a lifelong boater and outdoorsman, fisherman, things like that. And so I always kind of gravitated towards the industry and started to get interested in the marine safety business when I went to work for a company where flotation was one of our largest product lines, and kind of cut my teeth there, spent over a decade with that organization and moved on to a few other roles in the outdoor space. I'm always in a sales and marketing capacity. And about 8 years ago, I landed with Kent Safety Products, which is part of a company called Absolute Outdoor. And our primary business, 90% of what we do is all safety gear. And that goes everything from cute little things that kids might wear in a pool up to commercial immersion suits and very high-tech, well-designed gear that's purpose-built for people that are working on the water.
Amazing. And can you tell me that how Kent Safety got started and what led them to focus on the PFDs for commercial fishermen? Is there a historical story there that we can learn?
Yeah, actually, our organization, we're relatively young, if you will. We're about 15 years old, a little bit older. I think it was our 16th anniversary this year. But collectively within our organization, we all have PFD backgrounds and flotation backgrounds, including our president. And we've all been in and around this industry. And we saw some gaps, that particularly my boss 16 years ago. And we saw some gaps in the marketplace and saw some underserved markets. And we knew the flotation business well enough, and we knew the ins and outs about approvals and product design that we started the company. I wasn't here at that particular moment in time, but the company has went on to become the largest flotation manufacturer in the world. And that's a pretty quick rise in 16 years to get where we're at. But we've done that through innovative product design and listening to our customers.
I love that. And I hear about Kent Safety through the mouths of so many fishermen and partners of commercial fishermen, which we'll talk about later too. And this is probably why I would love to know what makes your PFDs ideal for commercial fishing compared to recreational or general use life jackets.
Yeah, so some life jackets, they're all going to float you as long as you're wearing them. But in certain environments, it makes sense to have certain features like high-vis fabrics for, low light environments or places where you really need to be seen either on deck or if you're overboard. Soulless, reflective, functional pockets, well-designed things like pockets and webbing and belts where snag hazards might exist. All of those things. There's a certain class of flotation called work vests. They have increased buoyancy and are made out of some different materials than you would find on recreational vests. And vests like the Rogue vest, which I'll probably mention a few times, is purpose-built. And it happens to not be Coast Guard approved, but designed for that person that may not have had any buoyancy at all previously. And this gives them enough buoyancy to aid in their own rescue and things like that. So you wouldn't find necessarily things like that on the recreational market. So there's quite a bit of difference, and it's all based on the activities of that commercial fisherman.
Nice. And it's interesting. Of course, the Rogue vest, I feel like that's one of the most well-known vests within the fishing, especially the Bering Sea crabbers. And that's how I know about Kent Safety, is because when I was at the Pacific Marine Expo several years ago, I was stopped at the booth, and I think it was Laurel Kinsel maybe, or someone within that community said, hey, check out this vest. This is the vest that most of the Bering Sea crabbers are wearing. And I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And we'll get into more of that later. But I'd love to know, and I know you've talked about this a little bit, but let's get into the weeds. How do you balance safety and comfort in your designs, given the physically demanding nature of commercial fishing? You mentioned have gotten a community feedback, and I'd love to know, how does that work? Like, how do you directly work with fishermen to test and improve your PFD designs, and what feedback has been most valuable for you?
First, we always start with the premise that no matter how good a life jacket is, it's no good if it's not being worn. So ultimately, the end product has to be something that suits the fishermen, suits the environment that they're in, and is actually going to be worn. We all know how fast accidents happen. Nobody ever expects them to happen. And we'll talk about this later, but that's one of the reasons life jacket wear has historically been low. Is the perceived risk isn't, that great, although the risk actually is. So we really have to understand those different environments. A Bering Sea crabber is a way different environment than a Gulf Coast shrimper or a lobsterman in the Northeast. And so we have to understand all those different environments. That's why there's such a wide array of products, because if you're in the Gulf in the summertime, you're not going to wear a flotation jacket. And if you're in certain environments, you may not want to wear an inflatable. So it's all about understanding those, and then we purpose design to those different environments and those different fishermen. In the case of the Rogue, we didn't set out for U.S. Coast Guard approval. We set out to meet an ISO standard, does meet European standards, but also it's thinking of particularly crabbers. In this case, we're swinging around heavy crab pots and things like that. The impact protection, rib protection, in addition to the fact that there's not a single buckle or pocket or snag hazard, and yet there's enough buoyancy that you can go overboard and still get rescued. So it's all about understanding those different environments and the different ways that the fishermen are using the flotation.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that it didn't even occur to me about the environmental impacts of wearing PFDs until I started speaking with you and other professionals who are immersed in this field. You're right. In the Gulf Coast and in the Southeast, it is hot AF in August. And the last thing you want to do is add one more vest or one piece of anything, clothing. And yeah, compared to Alaska in the summertime or even the winter, I mean, those are completely different planets that we live on. So it's so true. Just making sure that the fishermen feel comfortable enough to wear them no matter what the weather is really amazing. And I love that you guys reach out and have that support and communication within the community to know how to improve the gear, which is, all we want is for companies to truly, truly care for our fishermen as much as we do. And it does feel like Kent Safety is always on the pulse of that. So thank you for explaining all of this great stuff. And I'd love for you to go further and to tell us what are some of the latest advancements in PFD technology that specifically benefit commercial fishermen.
I'm going to back up a sec, though, if I can, on what you just said. And, a lot of our interest in the commercial fishing market and the knowledge that we gained was a result of, people like Laurel Kinsel and Jennifer Lincoln and the research that they did and started to produce, a little over 10 years ago. And that led to a lot of great programs of research, which I'm sure we'll touch on. But that's really was the genesis. It's like, this is totally an underserved community. As far as the latest advancements in PFD technology, people think a life jacket's, well, you can sew it. It's a T-shirt with foam in it, basically. But there's actually a lot of foresight that goes into it. And the way performance is strictly regulated by Coast Guard. Each life jacket, generally, with some exceptions, has a U.S. Coast Guard approval and goes through extensive in-water testing for every different size. And they measure all sorts of things: freeboard, your face plane angle, your body plane angle, your lowest point of respiration, jump tests. It's a litany of tests, and it's a lengthy process. It can take, 3 to 4 years to get a new design approved through that process. And sometimes it doesn't work. And unfortunately, Underwriters Laboratories doesn't work for free either. So we're usually pretty confident in our designs before we introduce something to them for testing. So that being said, those are the barriers. But the good things are we work really closely with our suppliers, our component suppliers. In inflatable life jackets, our primary supplier of the inflator mechanism, which is really the most important part, right? We work closely with our supplier, Halke Roberts, on those mechanisms. And we're always on the forefront of the latest and greatest. And there's been multiple generations of inflator technology over the last 25 years. And we are typically on the front end of those. And we collaborate with them and have the opportunity to give them feedback during their development process. There's maybe it seems like a small thing. We're introducing for all of our Kent Safety products, our foam products, something called a glide lock buckle. If you've ever had cold hands or for whatever reason, you're either really cold or you're tired, or maybe you don't have all your dexterity for whatever reason, life jacket buckles are pretty robust and they can be hard to buckle and unbuckle. We're introducing a new glide lock buckle that it's really easy to use with one hand. It's equally secure. It goes through all the testing, and that's exclusive to Kent. We're just rolling that out this year. So seems like a small thing, but to have that one-handed operation can be really important. So those are the kind of things we do, is work with our suppliers and, again, talk to the fishing community and find out what do they need. Sometimes we can do it and sometimes we can't.
I totally understand that. And this goes into our next question, which is why, many fishermen still don't wear PFDs. And I'm going to ask you some of the main reasons, but I also want to do a little side note here and share some stories on the side of the Partners of Commercial Fishermen community. So I asked my fisherman, I said, do you wear PFD? He said no. And I said, well, what are you going to do if an accident happens? And he just said, don't fall overboard. And I'm sure many listeners over here are going, yeah, I've heard that before. Then I was on a webinar with the United Kingdom Women in Fisheries. And I said, we're not required in the US for our fishermen to wear PFDs and their mouths dropped, because that's one of their biggest regulations ever, is that every fisherman has to wear them. From my understanding, I polled my private POCF membership community and I asked them about the PFDs. And it went from not really understanding what a PFD was to a woman in Canada who was super informed about all things fishing. They are required to have them aboard, but fishermen are not required to wear them, which is what really interesting. And it was funny during that conversation, was not funny, but just ironic that this happened. During the conversation about PFDs, and we had gone on for a while talking about it. And I want to shout out to Melissa Collier she's in British Columbia, Canada. She is so knowledgeable. I know many people probably know her out there. But she was sharing with us all this information about the PFDs that she uses. And while we're having this conversation, a partner in Oregon immediately messaged in the group and said, I'm really scared right now. The weather is really bad out here. The boats are getting backed up they can't cross over the break wall. There's certain tides that they have to regulate to get the boats in. And she was really terrified. And she said, he doesn't wear a PFD and I'm really, really afraid. Like, I really wish he had a PFD on. It would make me feel so much better right now. I'd have a lot more mental ease knowing that he was protected. And she said, if once he gets over here, I'm ordering all the PFDs to make him wear that. And it was interesting to talk to. There's another woman, Mandy Room. Have you know Mandy, or am I saying her last name correctly? Roome. I'm going to interview her soon as well. But she was telling me, and Laurel Kinsel, we talked about this on the podcast, that the number one reason that fishermen actually do wear them is because their partners tell them to. And the second reason they wear them is because their daughters or their children tell them to wear them. And so we just have to continually lovingly get on our fishermen and force them into these PFDs if you're in the US. But I was wondering, what are some of the main reasons that you hear, and how does your company address those concerns?
Well, first, I couldn't agree more. Rates are better than they've ever been of wear, but there's still a long way to go. And we don't want to forget that. The litany of reasons to not wear a life jacket are the ones you would expect. They're uncomfortable. They can be hot. They get in the way. There's potential a snag hazard. I don't need it. I have one on the boat, and if the weather gets bad, then I'll put it on. We've heard all of those things. The best way as a manufacturer that we combat that is by designing good product and making it accessible. But then we could have the best mousetrap in the world, and if a fisherman's not going to pick it up and it doesn't have a reason to change that behavior of not wearing it, and the reasons you mentioned are the strongest ones that we know of, and that is family loving recommendations. And I don't want to say the word pressure, but maybe that's the right word. But children, wives, and also within the fishing community, that peer interaction is incredibly important, because historically, you didn't want to be that guy. If nobody else is wearing a life jacket, There's a certain, I don't know, macho characteristic to that where you may not want to go down that road and be the pioneer in wearing a life jacket. But as that adoption rate increases, we see it's kind of a snowball effect, especially
Absolutely.
when the right gear is available.
There's one subject that we're constantly talking about, whether on the podcast or in our Partners of Commercial Fishermen community, and that is safety. And here's a hard truth. Did you know 8 out of 10 fishermen lost at sea weren't wearing a PFD? It's time to change that. At Kent Safety Products, they make life-saving gear designed for real fishermen. No bulk, no hassle, just protection that works when you need it most. They also have the most Coast Guard approved PFDs on the market. So whether you're fishing in hot or cold environments, a fisherman can find one to fit their needs. And partners, let's just pause for a moment and think about how much it would ease stress to know that your fisherman is protected each time they go to sea. It's a lovely thought, right? And as a side note, we only partner with companies that have heart, those who truly want the best for our fishing communities and have high quality products. That's why I am proud to have Kent Safety Products as a sponsor. Visit kentsafetyproducts.com and find the right PFD for you and your fishermen. That's kentsafetyproducts.com.
Absolutely. And even on a liability aspect too. I mean, if you're a captain of a boat, requiring your crew to have life jackets and wear them, and life jacket that will actually feel supportive and not hinder them within their work, feels like that would be an overall benefit for everyone involved. And, we're talking about the PFDs that save lives, and Kent Safety, I don't know if we've mentioned this before, but from my understanding, has the largest Coast Guard approved life jacket PFDs on the market. Is that correct?
Yes.
So, there's countless stories out there about Kent Safety saving lives that we haven't even heard of yet. But the fact, one of what comes to my mind is, we bring up the Bering Sea crabbers and that rogue vest. And I've mentioned that on my blogs before, and we talked about it today. But the fact that someone is even wearing it is going to be life-saving in the sense that there is even a chance that they will have a chance of survival if you're just wearing the PFD. And also, I'm going to reiterate this. Maybe this might be the second, or maybe many times I will reiterate this, but the ease of the mental stress of the partners in the family, knowing that their fisherman is safe, is not just literally saving their lives, but it is reducing mental strain on your family. It's about everyone involved. It's not just about fishermen. It's really, it does help everyone. Knowing that you are protected is going to make everybody's day breathe a little easier. So
For sure.
Absolutely. And so I know you mentioned this before, and maybe we could get into more of it, but what are some of the most common misconceptions about wearing PFDs in commercial fishing? You kind of mentioned this before, but were there any additional ones that you'd like to mention?
It's the things I did just mention: snag hazard, uncomfortable, hot. It gets in the way. I can't do my work as effectively. I've never had to use one. And especially for those folks that don't know anybody that has had an accident or they know of, but that's a pretty rare commercial fisherman that doesn't know personally of somebody that's had an overboard incident, or at least within their community have had, or know of those accidents. So that one's not as common. And that actually turns into a reinforcing point that, see, these things do happen, and be prepared.
So true.
It's never a negative, but those are all the misconceptions, I would say, because none of them are true if you have the right product.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up about them saying, I've never had to wear one before. And it's funny because, when my fisherman goes to Bristol Bay, or when he went to Bristol Bay in the past, he's like, don't worry about it. It's fine. And I'm like, it's fine. But you tell me about at least one person drowning every year, if not losing their life at sea every season, which is a very short season. I mean, they're only on the water for about 6 weeks. So obviously I'm going to be concerned here. Like, PFDs are needed in some way, shape, or form. And sometimes it's just jumping from the boat to the dock. I mean, it's not even like they're out in the ocean. It's those simple little movements that you don't even think about that can really affect everyone's life. And God, we always want our fishermen safe. Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I've never had to use it. However, we hear about fatalities all the time. And so our feelings are valid to want to make you want to wear a PFD. Okay, guys, we love you. That's what it's all about. So, okay, here's a great one. So as we mentioned before, some fisheries operate in extreme weather conditions, whether it's hot AF or it's super cold. And I would love to know, how do your PFDs perform in cold water, high seas, or icy environments?
That's a great question. And that kind of goes to the heart of some of those objections we just talked about. With like cold weather environments, obviously foam life jacket, especially things like flotation jackets, which are windproof, waterproof, and have all the buoyancy you need. And, they're Coast Guard approved life jackets. And yet they wear like a piece of foul weather gear. And the foam is distributed so it's not a big, bulky thing at all. It's much like wearing an insulated coat. And that's ideal for those cold weather, windy situations. So that's always a good solution. If it's very, very cold, the one thing we don't recommend is inflatables. The CO2 gas doesn't deploy as quickly. It does deploy, but it takes longer in that sub 35 degree Fahrenheit air temperature to inflate. So it's not recommended. But when you get to things like high seas, that's where inflatable life jackets, again, are really important because they have really high buoyancy. When it comes to buoyancy, doesn't matter how big you are, the average adult needs, 9 to 11 pounds of buoyancy to keep their head out of the water. The rougher the seas, the more buoyancy you want to keep your face and as high out of the water with as much freeboard as possible. But inflatables have, like our offshore inflatables, whether it's a Mustang Survival or Kent or whomever, typically have about 35 pounds of buoyancy. And going back to the fact that you only need, call it roughly round number 10, you've got 2.5 times the buoyancy that you would need in calm water to keep your head above water. A foam life jacket, a U.S. Coast Guard approved Type 3 life jacket, has about 15.5 pounds of buoyancy. So you think of a standard, mesh life jacket or just a life jacket that has 15.5 pounds of buoyancy, which is less than half of what an offshore inflatable has. And you get all that in a much smaller, more lightweight package. So that's a great choice for rough seas. And then in icy conditions and cold, I would again say things like flotation jackets make sense. There are some products like anti-exposure suits, which are suits that are basically coveralls that are a lot like a flotation jacket, but they're full body. Those are great. There's some products that exist that are functional bibs, and there's oilskins out there that have flotation integrated with them. Those are all really good choices for those cold weather conditions. And that's one of those situations where you've integrated two things. You've got your working piece of gear, your oilskins or your bibs, and then you've also got flotation along with it. And so those, I would say that's probably the performance-wise. Know where you're going to be, know what the conditions might be, and then have the right product for that. Somebody that fishes multiple fisheries, they may have several different life jackets depending on where they are, what type of this, when the season is, and what the conditions are.
Great. I love that point about the CO2 hydrogens. I never would have picked up on that before, but that's such a great point.
I'm going to interject too. You brought up icy conditions. The one thing I will say is, especially for the Alaska fisheries, I can't stress enough, and they technically are PFDs. Every vessel needs to have, well-fitting, inspected immersion suits on board. That doesn't do you any good in a man overboard situation. It does you all the good in an emergency situation. It could be a vessel fire. It could be any type of abandoned vessel scenario. Without that immersion suit to keep you afloat and to keep you from getting exposed to that 33-degree water, you don't stand a chance without it. And they're designed that you can put an immersion suit on. They're tested to be able to put them on and don them within 2 minutes. So it's designed for quick donning, quick water entry, and long time hypothermia protection. So in an icy situation, you're not going to be wearing it while you're working, but boy, that's nice to have if you need it.
Absolutely. And I have a story about that. I'm going to toot my fisherman's horn here because I believe that you have to have immersion suits or survival suits on boats in the US, or at least in California, maybe I have this incorrectly, but I'm pretty sure you have to have it in California for sure, if not the entire country.
There's certain latitudes,
Oh,
but
interesting.
almost all of the U.S.
Okay.
falls within those latitudes. If you
Ah,
get to super warm water down by equator and things like that, they're not required anymore. Key West, they're not.
oh,
But
interesting.
even as far north as like the Carolinas, they are.
Okay, great to know. And we're going to talk about this in the future too, but I do want to share this little anecdote is that my fishermen in Southern California, fishermen can apply for a grant with the South Bay Cable Company. And my fisherman applied and he was able to pick up a free Kent Safety Product survival suit from Avalon Rafts. It's a life raft store in Southern California, which I thought was amazing that they have this opportunity for fishermen to be able to grab these life jacket, these survival suits at no cost to their own, that it's available. So thank you for partnering with people like that. And I want to keep talking about this. So Melissa Collier, shout out to Melissa out in Canada. She talks about how they have their survival suits and they also have plastic bags that they have stored with them. So you can put them over your shoes to slide your leg in a lot quicker or slide your feet in the survival suit really quickly. And I was like, oh, that is so smart. I guess she did a training course and they learned that that was the fastest way to like get it on was to use a plastic bag to cover your feet. I was like, oh, that's genius. I got to share that.
That really is. I've heard that before, and I've worn my fair share of immersion suits, and I've never tried it. But I think I'm inspired to give it a try.
Heck yeah. I love it. So could you please tell me, just like we mentioned before with the survival suit program in Southern California, how does your company work with organizations like the Coast Guard or fishing safety programs to improve PFD adoption?
We work with a variety of institutions, and I mentioned it earlier, but that initial research that started to really come out in earnest between 10 and 15 years ago really kind of got us fired up for the industry. So we work with fishing partnerships, support services, folks like yourself, Megan, as well as the Northeast Center for Occupational Safety and Health and NIOSH as well. It gets to be a little bit of alphabet soup, but all of those research and support institutions, many of which are nonprofit or grant-funded organizations, sharing that information is a really important first step. We can't do what we do in a vacuum, and working with Coast Guard, we get observed wear statistics and things like that. But then working with those organizations I just mentioned, even more important, I think, is we get the reporting of what they find and fishermen self-reporting of wear, which I think in the right environment is actually accurate. I don't think there's a lot of fibbing going on there. So that's how we work with them. And then we also try to work with organizations, be able to funnel life jackets, like you mentioned, immersion suits with Avalon and other organizations, a lot of different retailers, and educating them and their people and their store associates on how to, effectively talk about life jackets and get that knowledge base out there. So when they're talking to somebody who's not quite sure what direction and what's going to meet their needs, they can give them the right guidance.
Absolutely. And I love that you mentioned all the programs that you just said. And so you said the Northeast Center for Occupational Health, that's where Mandy Room is. She works with that organization and I believe another one as well. When I was speaking with her, we were kind of debriefing and talking about our upcoming interview. And I was asking her about Kent Safety and asking her about the different PFD programs. And she said that what really stood out was that the fishermen really appreciated that people were asking them what they thought, like what they actually felt about the PFDs. It wasn't just, you have to wear a PFD and, deal with it. It was the fact that all these organizations are actively trying to connect with fishermen, and not only organizations, but Kent Safety Products, that y'all are actively wanting to hear back from them. And it's not just, here we have a product that you have to buy, or if your wife tells you to, it's, well, tell us why this isn't comfortable. How can we make this more accessible for you and your crew? I mean, that for the fishermen, from what Mandy was telling me, that really meant a lot to them. So I really want to applaud all the organizations and companies out there that really do want to hear back from the fishermen, because there's so many times, we know that we can be an underserved community. And a lot of times we just feel like things are piled on to us. and nobody's really listening. Maybe we can shout off to the ether and no one's actually there. But to know that there are people who really do want to know our opinions and our feedback truly do go a long way. So thank you to everyone who takes the time to do that.
Those are all great organizations, and by no means was that an all-inclusive list. Off the top of my head, we haven't even mentioned organizations like AMC,
Right.
and all of the great training that they do. And one thing that impresses me, and even in the last 5 years, I've noticed there's a lot more inter-organizational collaboration that's happening. And obviously research is published, but the people, it's a small community of both researchers and then the fishing community itself, and then, manufacturers like us. And there seems to be a triangulation that's happening that wasn't necessarily there 5 to 10 years ago. And I think that's a really great thing, that if everyone's working out of the same playbook and trying to have a commonality of message, that's a great thing.
Absolutely. And we're not all just in our little echo chambers of trying to just work on the same thing in different sections. We can all progress together. I love that. All right, let's get in. I'm going to get even deeper. So are there specific PFDs designed for different types of commercial fishing, such as crab, longlining, or shrimping, or is it mostly based specifically on a fisherman's needs, body type, and weather?
It kind of all goes back to, what is a fisherman going to wear? What would they like to wear? And we don't necessarily set out and say this is for a crabber. However, we know what those environments are. And we know NIOSH back probably, I think it was 9 years ago, they actually studied different commercial fishing groups. They studied crabbers, gill netters, longliners, and trawlers, and who was wearing what and what their rates of wear were and what they preferred. And it was pretty interesting because there were differences. There was no one size fits all, one type of jacket fits all. For crabbers, things like inflatable life jackets and rogue vests, that were really the two. And actually, they preferred rogue even over inflatables. Gill netters, probably the best thing for gill netters are things like flotation jackets, the anti-exposure suits, bibs with integrated flotation, just based on that environment. And that was their preference. Longliners, they were the least likely to wear their life jackets. And the strong preference for longliners were inflatables. And that was almost overwhelming. That was the preference. And then with trawlers, regular mesh foam vests, that's a very popular choice, as well as, again, bibs with integrated flotation. Inflatables, again, inflatables come up, except in those really cold weather environments, they're usually a good choice. So outside of that specific instance, inflatables usually have application in most commercial fishing situations.
Got it. And so on that note, many fishermen worry about PFDs being both bulky and restrictive, as we've been saying. So what are some of the most lightweight and flexible options available? And would you say that an inflatable would be considered in that realm, or? That
was the whole genesis. Inflatable PFDs really became a thing late 80s, early 90s. There was a man named Scott Swanby. He lost his best friend in a fishing accident, not a commercial fishing accident, a recreational, but he lost his best friend. And he was fishing alone, didn't have a life jacket on. And he didn't wear a life jacket. And he always told Scott this because they were too hot, bulky, restrictive. Scott developed an inflatable life jacket. And the rest is history from there. It took about 10 to 15 years to get U.S. Coast Guard approval. And that was about 25 years ago, a little bit longer, maybe 30. So inflatables are, like I said, almost always a good choice. The downsides, they cost more than a foam life jacket, and they require maintenance. I mean, you have to check them. You have to inflate them regularly, check the bladder. You don't have to blow them off to do that. You can just do it with your oral tube. Very simple to do. But You have to check if it's an automatic inflatable where you go in the water and it inflates on its own. If there's a water sensing bobbin in there, you have to check that periodically. It's got a 5-year lifespan. And so you have to check that. You want to check your CO2 cylinder occasionally. They don't go bad, but you have to just make sure it hasn't been punctured and somebody put an empty one in your CO2 cylinder. So those are kind of the pluses and minuses when it gets to inflatables, but they're certainly not bulky and they're not restrictive. And that's how they came to be. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. I'm wondering what other lightweight options are available and what is considered lightweight? Like what is the poundage or ounces for a lightweight vest?
I mean, most foam life jackets, depending on what kind of hardware and closures and stuff like that they have, most of them weigh under 3 pounds and some barely 2. So there's not a lot of weight there. I think it's more the bulk and the size that people get hung up on. And when it comes to outside of inflatables, when it comes to foam vests, things like the Rogue vest, it's a little heavier based on the materials. The neoprene and the foam that's used is a special kind of foam. And that's a little bit heavier, still by no means heavy, but certainly compact and smooth all the way around. So very, very comfortable. But then you can take something like a mesh top vest, which is very lightweight. It's good all-purpose design. The Rogue is a little warmer. It's got foam from your shoulders to your waist, whereas the mesh vest really is from your rib cage down. So you have that breathability up top. Again, depending on the temperature and the environment that you're in, those are all considerations.
Great. And yeah, well, now that you mentioned the vest, I did know that Chris wore an inflatable vest when he was in Bristol Bay, and it almost looked like it was kind of padded too. So it kind of gave that protection when needed. So, and on that note, I also forced him to get an EPIRB because I'm like, we need everything to protect your life. Sorry, I love you, but I would love to know if there's any new features like built-in safety beacons or waterproof pockets being added to PFDs for commercial fishing use.
We stay abreast and we understand what other safety gear we need to be compatible with. I kind of look at the life jacket as the chassis of a car. And then all these other features are add-ons, because you can have the best EPIRB in the world. If you can't stay afloat for 2 minutes in icy water, doesn't matter. So the life jacket's kind of the foundation. And we are always weary of the 2 + 2 = 3 scenario. It's hard to design to get that 2 + 2 = 5. And so what we try to do is build life jackets that accommodate different types of gear, be it a PLB or an EPIRB, something simple like life jacket lights, all of those things, engine cutoff switches. We try to make our life jackets designed so all of those things by different manufacturers are compatible with the life jackets. And there's a lot of different styles. And that way, a life jacket, typically the lifespan can be as long or longer than certain types of electronics. There's, the evolution of EPIRBs and PLBs. I mean, there's new ones coming out all the time. You don't want to have to get rid of your life jacket because you want the new EPIRB technology, for instance. So we're always cognizant of that. Things like waterproof pockets, we always look at those types of things and think, well, from a design standpoint, how's that going to affect performance? Waterproof pockets, we're always cautious of, and we've done some testing. You don't want to have them too big. They can trap air in them and maybe change the way you float in the water. That's those types of considerations. The size of pockets on other life jackets, can't make them too big either, because goodness knows what somebody's going to put in there. And you don't want them to be weighed down if they were to go in the water. So, there's some pretty tight guide rails, but we are aware of all the other safety equipment that we'd love to see fishermen utilizing, and we try to accommodate those.
I love hearing about all of this research that goes into these safety vests. I would have never known, and I am so thankful that it's happening. That's for sure. And I have a question. This is kind of a 2-part question. One part goes back to what we were talking about, the inflatables. Whenever you test the inflatables, do you need to have it approved or checked once you put it back together again? Or is it pretty self-explanatory of how to get the vest back to where it needs to be?
It's pretty self-explanatory.
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot of good YouTube videos out there that show it step by step, and most of them by any manufacturer, it's pretty similar repack and rearm process. It's quite easy to do. Frankly, the hardest thing to do is making sure you get the right rearming kit, because there's a lot of them out there. So know your model, know your manufacturer. Best case scenario, have it in front of you when you're shopping for rearm kits online, or bring it to the store with you. That's the best advice I can give. Any service station that inspects immersion suits and life rafts typically is well equipped to also double check an inflatable. And they're happy to do that typically at no charge. It's pretty straightforward stuff.
Great. That's exactly what I was going to ask, because about the life raft, how you have to have that done professionally and repacked and everything like that. So that's cool that you can one-stop shop all of the safety requirements, have them all approved in one area.
For sure.
And so you mentioned how your PFDs can last longer than some of the technological changes, obviously, and even some of the actual pieces of equipment. So I'm wondering, how do you ensure that your PFDs are durable enough to withstand years of wear in harsh marine environments? I mean, we know salt can break so much stuff down. So how do you guys make sure that that doesn't happen?
So it's a pretty rigorous process. Every component in a life jacket, be it a zipper, a buckle, webbing, obviously the fabric and the foam, and there's several different types of foam that are used. Every single thing has to be Underwriters Laboratory listed. So every component is tested to a certain standard that's set by Coast Guard. And so we can't just go buy any nylon, for instance. It has to be nylon by one of just a few handful of manufacturers that have Underwriters Laboratory listed nylon. And that goes for every component. So when we do things like there's xenon testing for aging and weathering of the fabrics, and obviously all the testing of the performance of the product itself. But one of the things we do on pretty much all of the Kent Safety products, where there's a visible webbing stitch, we usually use box X stitches, and the webbing is black. We always stitch in high vis orange. So you can do a visual inspection and see if that stitch is entirely intact. And that's important, obviously, for strength. So you can do a quick visual inspection that way. So like I said, every component's highly tested, and then you can do a visual inspection as far as fabric fading and checking the seams and the integrity.
Amazing. And I love how specific it is, in that there are only a few people that you can buy this fabric from. And speaking of that, of creating new PFDs in the future, what do you see the future of PFD design heading for commercial fishing? Are there any emerging trends or technologies that are coming about?
There's a couple of things happening. There are some new Coast Guard regulations that should be coming into play here, and they're allowing a standard which is called level 50, which is a little lower buoyancy. It's more like a rogue vest. A rogue vest will qualify as a level 50 device. So that opens the way to a whole new class of products that haven't existed before if they needed to be Coast Guard approved. So that's one thing. A little lower buoyancy, but the trade-off is additional comfort, less bulk, and different configurations of the way the foam lies on the body and things like that. So that's one. And we're always interested in inflatable mechanism advancements. That's a long development cycle, but I envision a time where electronic inflators absolutely could come into play. They're already in play when you look at other safety gear. The water activated life jacket lights. I mean, those have been around for eons, but then in the last 10 years, Coast Guard has approved electronic flares. So you're not using pyrotechnics, but you have electronic flares and things like that. So I think that inflator mechanism technology could only make things, better. Again, still requires some user intervention and user inspection. I think Also, just looking at reboarding in the case of man overboard, especially for solo fishermen. If you're fishing single-handed, yes, staying afloat's really, really important. But if you can't reboard your vessel, flotation's only so good unless help is on the way. So we're trying to figure out how we can work with some other manufacturers to look at how can we work together to have reboarding equipment and the life jackets that play nice with one another.
I love that. What came to my head was the kill switch, an engine kill switch. How do we trigger that engine to shut off if a fisherman goes overboard who's a solar fisherman? Like maybe there's a way in the future that the technology would have that ability to.
I think there is, to be honest.
Oh, nice. That's awesome. Yeah. These are all the things I don't think about. Like in my head, I'm thinking, oh, it's calm waters. Well, hello, we know it's not always calm waters. In my head, I'm thinking, oh, if they fall over, they can get back on the boat. Well, no, if their boat's on autopilot, their boat's driving away. Like there's so many other things to think about. I love that you guys are staying on the pulse of this and talking with other people. That's huge that there's collaboration in that manner.
We know, like I said, kind of the life jacket's kind of the foundation of the safety gear, but there's so much other equipment that can really benefit commercial fishermen.
Heck yes. I'm so here for it. Okay. And on another note, are there any efforts to make PFDs more environmentally friendly or easier to recycle on a manufacturing level?
Yeah, our polyethylene foam waste, scrap, basically, it's reground and recycled, reused. We can't put it back into life jackets. Regrind is not allowed, but we can use it for any other polyethylene material. For quite some time, we polybagged our life jackets, clear poly bag, just to keep them clean and dust free and such. And that was made out of our leftover foam. So we're at 100% on that. We know we don't have any PFAS in our entire supply chain, any of our components. Yeah, and the one thing that we're also trying to work for is from a design standpoint, there are some next generation foams that are either biodegradable or are much more recyclable. And, we're looking at that. Both the barrier is we got to continue to drive that and get approval for it for the reasons I just told you. But those things are on the horizon. I can't quite give you a timeline. And then I think there's other things we can do with responsible disposal options. And may not be disposal. It may be, kind of a hand-me-down situation. Many of the life jackets we're talking about are applicable also to the recreational boater. So if the commercial fisherman wants to upgrade his gear, or it's time for a new one, if they've got something that's perfectly serviceable, rather than throw it away, give it to somebody who might be able to use it.
It's a great way to put it. And also start recreational fishing when you're not fishing, and then you can just use your PFD from one boat to another. That's another great way to do it. I love that though, passing it on though. I really love that image and the meaning behind that. And I'd love to know, where can commercial fishermen learn more about your PFDs or try them on before purchasing? How do you recommend them purchasing a Kent Safety Product PFD?
Well, if they want a base level of knowledge, I would say the organization we already talked about, Fishing Partnership Support Services, and the Fisherman-Led Injury Prevention Program out in the Northwest. The Life Jacket Association website is a great resource, as is the Coast Guard website and ours, the Kent website. The Northeast Center for Occupational Safety and Health, that is a great resource as well. And AMC, and then Fisherman has the opportunity, and this, you've been, Pacific Marine Expo is always a great time. And, every PFD manufacturer in the commercial fishing space is there live and in person and with product to try on and, answer questions and things like that. And then kind of the boots, that's more online stuff and a trade show. But, there's a lot of really knowledgeable retailers out there that we partner with. Folks like Hamilton Marine up in the Northeast, England Marine in the Northwest. And I don't want to leave anybody out, and I can't name everybody. But those are just some examples. they're pretty knowledgeable folks. And it's not like going into certain retailers where there's a constant turnover. They have knowledgeable people that stay and care about gear. And we do our best to train those folks in person on a regular basis. And also work with them for in-store literature and information. So I would say those are all good resources.
Absolutely. That's a great master list. I love that. I know that you said that there could be more added. And for the fisherman or the fisherman's partner who, doesn't have time or lives in remote areas, what advice do you have for them if they're going to purchase online from Kent Safety Products? Do they need to know, like, is it a weight thing? Is it their height? Like, what measurements would be the most helpful when buying a PFD?
Great question. I get that all the time. And, one of the questions that's really the most common when I talk to people considering life jacket purchases is, well, I'm a big guy, is that going to float me? Well, and then we talk about buoyancy and it's like, okay, I get that. Doesn't matter really my size. So the key measurement is simply, well, I'd say there's two. Number one is your chest size. That's the way these are all, and I'm talking adults only, kids are a different thing, but with adults, it's all based on chest size. And then the other criteria I would say is try it on, and comfort would be the second thing, because everybody's got a different body shape. And just because your chest size is within a certain range for a certain model or product, doesn't mean it's right for you. You got to try it on and see how it feels. But size ranges, most of our products, especially foam vests, go at least 60 inches on the low end for the larger sizes, all the way up to 70. So 70 inches is pretty generous, even for somebody that's pretty big and has a lot of fall weather gear on. And that's why we size up even our inflatables to 65-inch chest. Not many people have a 65-inch chest, but we recognize that life jacket should always be the highest layer of clothing that you have on. Shouldn't be worn under, your foul weather gear, bibs or jackets or anything like that, whether it's foam or an inflatable. It should always be on top. And so that's why we have that generous sizing. But chest size is it.
Yeah, no, that makes me think about women fishermen. And I'm wondering if there was any notes about specifically if women fishermen preferred one over the other, or if generally the feedback was the comfort, like you were saying, the body type. Did any of that stand out with any feedback that you've gotten from any of the organizations that you've worked with?
Definitely women fitting is important, and it's frankly a little tougher to do than it is. And, it really depends on the person and trying it on. That's why I stress that so much is you got to try it on. I mean, sure, it may fit and it may be properly sized for you and perform well, but if it's not comfortable, you're going to be less likely to wear it.
Yeah, absolutely. And to reiterate every point that we've said this whole time, I'd love for us both to share this answer. For if a fisherman is hesitant to wear a PFD, what advice would you give to help shift their mindset? And I'm going to go ahead and say it's the partners and the family, the motivation. And, the scary stat is that 8 out of 10 fishermen who were lost at sea weren't wearing PFDs. And that just blows my mind right there. 8 out of 10 weren't wearing a PFD who were lost at sea. And I'm going to reiterate this too. The ease of the mental stress. If you want your partner to stress less, wear the freaking PFD. We love you and we're not going to apologize for it. But, that was something that really stuck out to me, was that stat that 8 out of 10 fishermen lost at sea were wearing PFDs. And the fact that the family motivations are huge, huge influence on why fishermen actually wear them. Is there anything that you would add to that?
Yeah, I think that also underscores the fact that we all know that commercial fishing is a very statistically very dangerous occupation. In the U.S., it's the most dangerous occupation that there is. And by a long shot. And 8 out of 10 weren't wearing, in drowning situations, weren't wearing a PFD. Well, that math kind of bears out how important it is.
Absolutely. And I know that we had talked about before, like talking about the whys you should wear it and not the why not you should wear it. The list is so much longer of why someone should wear a PFD rather than, why not? Why aren't you going to wear one? So This has been such an incredible conversation. I really do appreciate you taking the time to share what the world of PFDs, what it's like at Kent Safety Products, and all of the effort, all of the work, all of the research, all of the people and the organizations that you work with to make these incredible products. The largest manufacturer of PFDs on the market and Coast Guard approved PFDs on the market. And we're just so thrilled to have y'all as a sponsor, because we only partner with people who truly care for the commercial fishing industry and have high quality products. And you guys embody that message. So thank you for all that y'all do so much. And we would love to know, what's the best way to connect with you or Kent Safety Products?
Our numbers on our website, and you can always call us. You'll get a live person. And our website is www.kentsafetyproducts, all one word, .com. And so that's the best way to do it. I'm always around too. If somebody calls here and wants to talk about flotation and safety, I'm always ready to talk.
I love that. And if you couldn't tell from this interview, Len is just so approachable, so caring, and he really is such a great contact. And also, I want to throw out, if anybody has any questions about PFDs, you can also email me directly at support@pocfpride.com, and I'll make sure that those answers are given to you by a professional who knows, and that professional will be Len. I'll reach out to Len and say, hey, this is a specific question that this partner or this fisherman had. So we are all here. We're here aboard to help you in any way possible. Everybody listening, whether it's for commercial fishing or recreational, let us know if any questions that you have, because we want to help reduce that stat. We don't want to worry about our fishermen losing their lives at sea. And we don't want fishermen to lose their lives, their comrades' lives. We love you guys so much. And we are here to do whatever we can to have these thriving families and these coastal communities. And that begins with saving and keeping your life. So thank you so much again, Len, for your time. And any questions that y'all have about Kent Safety, you know where to come. It's kentsafetyproducts.com or the pocfpride.com. We got you.
I really appreciate you taking the time, Megan, and the opportunity to talk with you today. Thank you.
Absolutely, Len. Thanks so much again.
Okay. Have a great day.
You too.
As you know, safety is one of our biggest concerns as partners of commercial fishermen. So if you or someone you know has been injured while working on the fishing vessel, you don't have to navigate it alone. Do you know your rights and what happens after an injury? Would you like proactive legal education before issues arise? Need expert guidance before making decisions that could impact your case? Attorney Michael Flynn has been fighting for injured fishermen for decades. And as a side note, we only partner with sponsors who genuinely care about commercial fishing families, which is why I'm proud to introduce Michael as a sponsor of the POCF community. You can contact him today for a consultation at flynnworkus.com. That's FLYNNWIRKUS.com. And tell him that the Partners of Commercial Fishermen sent you. Did you know that there are no mandatory stability requirements for commercial uninspected fishing vessels in the U.S.? The Seaworthy Foundation is tackling this issue head-on through a federally funded project by the National Institute of Health. They're also in New Bedford, Massachusetts, launching an innovative head protection project, developing helmets designed to keep fishermen safe without interfering with their work, similar to flotation device programs. In addition, they're mapping vessel hazards firsthand, surveying crews to identify blind spots in dangerous areas, creating essential safety guides for greenhorns and new crew to navigate vessels safely. To learn more and support their mission, visit seaworthyfoundation.org. That's seaworthyfoundation.org. Thank you so much for listening. To support our community, I'd so appreciate it if you'd tap the subscribe button to this podcast or write a review. And if you're a POCF who wants to connect further, go to pocfpride.com for weekly blogs and to learn about opportunities to join our private communities. We'd love to have you.